welcome everybody. Thank you so much for taking time to join us today and giving us the motivation to do this in the first place. As you might have noticed, we've been very excited about this technology for a little while. And yeah, so much has happened in the last year. We wanted a time to just pause and reflect, look back and laugh at what's happened already and where the world has gone to, reflect on what's happened in the last 24 hours and the last 3 days, as so many new things have happened. And in doing so, learn some lessons about the future and where this is going and what we all need to do if we want to be part of this and benefit from this and stay relevant, I think. So that's the point of today. What we're going to do is about an hour, try and keep it to an hour of quite tight content. We've got a lot to get through. We've got some fun slides, which kind of have demos baked into them, but we're not going to be doing a lot of, actually, we're not going to do any opening of ChatGPT in the first hour. We just want to get through some great content and just show you where our heads are at. After an hour, when we've finished with that, we absolutely would love, first of all, some of you to come off mic, off mute, and say hi and ask questions. We'll get into more discussions. We might go on random tangents and fire up ChatGPT and try some things out, show you some things. So the second half an hour or hour, depending how long you want to stay, super flexible and super chaotic. And the first hour, yeah, relatively tight and structured, but fun. That said, yeah, we would love all of you great people to get to know each other. So it's deliberately not a webinar where you're all anonymous. Come off, put your camera on if you like, so that people can see your face. Say hi in the chat, tell everyone who you are or where you're from, and give everyone a sense of who else is here. And most importantly, please ask questions and make comments as we go through. There's 4 of us here from the team, and we're not all talking at the same time. So we can both have a fun dialogue and discussion in the questions and have some nice content on the screen and a big discussion going at the same time as well. So be as active as you like, as engaged as you like, ask as many questions as you like. And when I'm talking, maybe Richard or somebody else will interrupt me and interject with a question if there's one that's relevant or a comment or something else. So boom.
All wired in.
All wired in. Yeah, I traveled all the way across London so we could be here in person and make this a bit more dynamic than just a regular Zoom call. So there we go.
Great.
Anything else to say before we start?
Let's go for it.
All right, cool. Let's go for it then. So nearly 12 months, nearly the birthday of ChatGPT. And we thought we'd laugh to start with and reflect on how our journey started. So some of you on the call know a friend of ours, Alistair Kroll. And we've been sharing prompts and the amazing things that ChatGPT could do. This is early December, so this is about a week after it had come out. And Alistair was like, you should write a book about this. You're very good. You should write a book. I was like, I don't know about that. So Alistair and I had this chat about it on WhatsApp. And then I messaged you saying, hey, do you want to drop everything for a couple of weeks and just write a book?
Yeah, and I remember, so I have a gym class that starts at 1 o'clock. So by 6 minutes to 2, I was exhausted. I just had field work of a project moved back to January. I'm like, yeah, what's 2 weeks between now and Christmas? Let's do it. Let's roll up our sleeves. And what was it, 17 days from that text to hitting publish. Mind-blowing.
One of the best 17 days ever, I tell you. So this was not planned, but that's how it started. This is how it's going. We've worked with people in every industry we could imagine so far. We've worked with songwriters and musicians. We've worked with Hollywood screenwriters, strategists, CEOs, marketers, HR people.
Yeah, operations people.
Yeah.
Yeah, supply chain. Yeah.
Management consultants, accountants, you would not believe. And it's been so fun to go out and say, how can what we've learned in our domain be practically useful to you and yours? It's been an incredible journey. Yeah, we've been sharing what we've learned along the way in updates to the books, and we're going to do a new update in a few weeks. And in training sessions with clients and all sorts of other ways. So we're trying our best to learn from you all and then share it back with everybody else. So hopefully you'll do the same in the chat during this session today. So what started with a WhatsApp message ended with 5 books, and here we are today. So we'll see. And then this slide is pretty much our agenda for today. We're not going to go through it in order, but we are going to pretty much cover this as we go through today. This is a reflection then on where we were in language models in ChatGPT, like where we were in November of last year. And we're going to reflect just for a minute on how amazing that was and has been for the last year, what the use cases are and what the lessons are. We're going to take the first section to just talk about that. Then after, well, up until today, where we are today, you know, unbelievable amount of change. I don't think we thought any of this was going to happen in November.
Not at this speed. There's certainly not. No. Yeah, I mean, you could see the potential, but the pace of this development and the announcements on Monday this week, just show how quick and how much in demand these tools are, right?
And some of the most fun stuff we're going to show you as we get to the end of the hour is stuff that literally went live for me about 11 o'clock last night. I've been hitting refresh for days, like waiting for it to go live. Finally, 11 p.m. I got it. And so I couldn't sleep last night as I was fiddling around with this new tech. I'll show you that later, right at the very end, actually. So this is, you know, so fast. And every image on here is something that is powerful and useful and practical in all of our lives. Everything on here is there for a reason. So let's take a look. And we'll start by just reflecting on where we were. So we had ChatGPT arrived late November a year ago. It was on a model called GPT 3.5. That's not that important. It could read, you know, like a few thousand words, and it could remember, you know, a couple of thousand words after some of that was used up by the system. It could write, you know, several paragraphs, like maybe 1,000 words at a go if you really pushed it. It could think like pretty well. And it had knowledge up to September 2021, which was plenty for us at the time, like not a big barrier. And what happened as a result of that? Well, we realized that if you take vast amounts of training data, as OpenAI did, you know, some rough, crude approximation to the sum total of human knowledge, if you take vast amounts of training data and you put this model on top, it turns out you can do some pretty interesting analytics. And a lot of people did not know that was possible. I didn't know that was possible in late November. It turned out it was. And so in the way that we've been manipulating numbers and data for years and years and years, we found that we could now manipulate ideas and knowledge in that same way. We called it the analytics of knowledge. It suddenly unlocked, suddenly became possible. And it changed everything about how we do our jobs and how many of you do as well. And I remember one of our conversations in December about writing the book. And I said something like, oh, are we crazy? Or is this actually useful? Like, are we living in some kind of dream world? Or is this really actually practically helpful? I wasn't sure. Like, I couldn't tell.
Yeah, and it felt like the world was so polarized of this is terrible. Look at this mistake it made. How could it make such a basic mistake? Through to like, let's all give up now. Let's quit our jobs. And it's clear the answer was somewhere in the middle. And it wasn't the same answer to every single question going through. And that for me was such a motivation for the book, is just to kind of lead from the front and make all those errors, find all those little pockets of great appetite, great success for the tool, and write them down and share it, and do it in a really open and transparent way, kind of learning and sharing as we go.
And for me, I remember a moment about 2 months ago, I think, pretty recent, where the most recent academic study came out, and I read this slide, and I sat back thinking, finally, it doesn't really matter what we think, because there's enough weight of evidence in the world that what we're saying is true. Like, no one has to rely on us anymore or believe us. You can believe like academics who've really studied this stuff. So this slide for me was a major turning point in like the weight of evidence that exists for the benefit of these models.
Yeah, and if we think back, I think the evidence in the book is passing exams.
Yeah.
And it's very much textbook knowledge. And I think there was more critique of the education system than there was of language models. But certainly some of these studies show that, it's real people, real skilled people, real business practices, and that range and breadth of things that on the right-hand side, communication, naming, segmentation, which we do a lot of, it's such a broad set of skills. This isn't just a hammer looking for nails. This is such a broad and widespread set of use cases, and I mean, as we are, so many more still to discover, because super exciting.
Yeah, I think almost every day I still work out a new way to use this thing and giggle slightly to myself. But you know, so no more just saying, well, David and Richard and the team said, you know, these people say that work is better, quicker, there's less heavy lifting, increased productivity, people are happier, you know, all these things. And whether you're applying it or testing it out on ideation or prioritization or segmentation or writing, creative stories, or all these things, like there's evidence that it's significantly beneficial. And my favorite study, this is the one that tipped me over and made me just really relieved, was one on loads of management consultants. I would like to read this out. It's worth reading every word. In this study, those management consultants using ChatGPT outperformed those who did not by a lot on every dimension, every way we've measured performance. They finished 12% more tasks, 25% more quickly, with 40% higher results. I mean, that's insane.
Yeah, no trade-off there, right? Upside. Yeah, and fractional costs, right? Minor costs with all this, essentially free.
Yeah, essentially free. Right, so the world has shown, and we have shown, but more importantly, the world has shown that this technology was incredibly important and made a big difference. The question is, how do we use it? And that's in some ways one of the most difficult questions, I think. So we've come up with 4 different frameworks we use to answer the question, like, how can ChatGPT, or like, how can language models help you? 4 ways which are useful in different situations. We'll talk about these just quickly. The first way is the book, is the December version of how it's useful. Tell us a bit about that.
So yeah, kind of a synthesis of our combined, 30, 40 years marketing experience. So from Unilever to launching brands, to helping artists launch, to help new albums from established artists, launching TV programs, TV brands, kind of a look through the kind of standard marketing phases, right? From exploring your audience and your market with no knowledge, through to selecting target audience. Anybody who's worked with us knows how much we like understanding audiences and segmentations, leading then into your go-to-market strategy, some of your classic Ps from marketing, academic world, through to creative thinking, innovation, NPD, startup ideas. So this was the framework for Prompt for Brands. Anybody who hasn't started with the kind of prompt movement, this is definitely your place to start. But that gave us a great kind of, if you like, sort of currency and language to engage with companies of all different types. And whether you're using this exact language or these exact phrases and frameworks, I think there's something for everybody here, and just seeing real practical use cases, and every word on the page is a set of examples for how in different industries, taking protein bars and coffee and DJs and nightclubs, so much range in the examples that we could apply these use cases to. It really felt like there was almost no category that couldn't be helped by some of these case studies. So anyone working in brands or marketing or insight or research, which many of our contacts are, this is the kind of what we find is the most accessible currency for understanding prompts guidelines.
So we most often use this as to answer the question, how can it help me? But we have 3 other ways of looking at it. You developed this one for training sessions we were doing. Right?
Yeah, so an interesting example, when we had a marketing team looking to expand the culture, and we'll talk a bit more about cultural change later. How can they engage with operations and supply chain and IT? How can they really boil down what it is that ChatGPT can do? And it's not worth talking about competitors and segmentation. So really boiling it back down to the skills. And we quickly realized there are like 4 really quite unique and independent things that it can do here. So from condensing information, what we could do at the time, we could upload a few hundred reviews. I mean, with these new limits, that's now a few thousand, a few tens of thousands of reviews. But its ability to condense that information into quite thoughtful summaries, that's really unique from desk research, calling on that training set, the analytics of knowledge, which is different again from actually generating content, being on the front foot, whether that's social media posts or developing a plan or writing even just a letter of communication to another team member or to an agency, through to the kind of space we love to play, which is creative thinking. So crunching together, clashing together quite interesting or challenging or opposing ideas, and how can it kind of elevate, really go through the gears to think slightly more creative, really challenge our own thinking in how it operates. And yeah, we're going to ask you and where you think you're operating across that kind of creative ladder in a second. But yeah, a useful reflection that there are some really like fundamental unique building blocks of what these tools are doing alongside the application for marketing brands that we talked about before.
Yeah, I'm sure there are many more frameworks we could come up with. There's two more that we use quite often. This one for training, and almost everything we do when we're training people is on thinking and communicating tasks. How can it help me with those? But also, if you want to make some images, that's a whole separate set of skills and jobs. We'll talk a bit about that in a minute. If you want to do analytics and data science, that's a whole separate set of conversations and training. We've done lots of that. We'll talk about that in a minute and show you some examples. And if you want to write code, again, a slightly different set of tools you would use, or ways of using it, and slightly different set of use cases. So it's worth breaking it out that way. So sometimes this is a helpful framework when you're talking to people, but my favorite framework of the 4 frameworks that we have, my favorite is our ladder. Tell us about the ladder.
Yeah, so fantastic. I think this reflects our early stages. Thinking back to that text in December, we were probably kind of halfway up that ladder, but in our own uses, we started at the bottom of the ladder. It was small talk, developing a little poem, a new a new verse for a song, for instance. So we were just playing with it, having fun, simple brainstorming. But very quickly, and this was our realization in the initiation of the book, like it could help with more challenging things like that. So it could explain complicated concepts. So tell me this marketing theory, but explain to me like I'm a 12 or 13-year-old. It could help us with genuine, like real world tasks, problem solving, writing job descriptions. That basic content generation was great. And then as we went through the gears, thinking about these higher levels, so advanced creativity, ideation. So I've got a consumer segment, I'm telling you what the needs are. Give me some startup ideas. How can I target them with specific products, product benefits? That's really good at trawling that training set and coming up with ideas right through to the very top. So yeah, strategic insights, decisions. Help me with this balanced argument. Help me explain this complicated situation. Help me with recommendations or advice. We'll come on and talk about the human role alongside these, especially before and like even more so afterwards. But yeah, let's pause for a second. Let's hear in the chat. Let's give a couple of minutes to hear from everyone, please. So where would you say your current usage maximum is at this stage? Where's your kind of high water level? Let's have a number as to where you think you're operating across the scale. Hopefully we'll have some 5s and 6s, but absolutely we've worked with everybody across the scale. Many people not even on the ladder when we talk to them. Many of our training sessions are right from scratch. Like we just don't know where to start. Help us get into first gear and then explain what we can do here. And we think it's possible to operate at those higher levels with completely different mindset, completely different culture with how it can be used. But absolutely, we've seen the real world case studies of people operating at 5 and 6, which is really nice. So what we're seeing, David?
All the 1s that we usually have are staying very quiet because a bunch of 4s got in early on the chat and set the expectation. So I know there's lots of 1s out there, and it's okay, but mostly 4. So that's a pretty engaged group compared to other groups we've worked with. Some 5s. Some people mentioning struggles trying to get to that next level. Definitely some 3s and 2s as well. Someone's at 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5, which feels about right. So yeah, this fantastic. So the question is, how can it help? There's so many different frameworks to use, and this is one of the most fun ones. Keep those answers coming in. Right. And before we get onto all the new stuff that we really want to show you, let's just reflect on some lessons. So it's all well and good talking about how it can help you, but what are some lessons for how it can be useful? And this page is one. If I had a 1 page to show somebody, this is my favorite, which for me tells the story that a prompt is not enough. Many people say, give me a good prompt, that's all I need. And the answer is a prompt is not enough. But what does this slide mean to you?
Yeah, I think, absolutely. It helps overcome that idea that it's all about the prompt for sure, but it gives the human angle and the whole idea that the strongest partnership here is the humans with the robot. It's us working in partnership and thinking through these 4 lenses. I think in the early days, we were creating a lot of those individual lessons. Hey, if you iterate the prompt, you get a better response. Hey, if I ask for 10 answers and pick the best 2 and then query again, So all of those lessons, I think, essentially ladder up to this, which is our 4Ps. So prep is before you've even opened the tool. What are you coming to the table with? What are you trying to achieve? How are you going to talk to it? What quality of answer do you want out the back? And also within prep is, what are you bringing to the table in terms of your background knowledge and information, whether that's from your head, whether that's documents that we can now upload, whether that's just an exec summary of a previous piece of work that we can bring in. So prep, what are you bringing to the table before you even open the tool? Of course, with all these tools, we need to be prompting. There's lots of guidelines. We're not going to go into them today about exactly how to write a great prompt, but clearly it's very important. It's not just give me a XYZ. The more we can articulate those requirements, the better. The human angle definitely comes in through process. So we're operating in organizations that have existing processes. I'm sure many of those processes are evolving with the arrival of AI, but even with existing processes, the work isn't done within the tool. The work essentially at some point needs to leave the tool. So how are you integrating the outputs from generative AI into your day-to-day processes within the company? And clearly there's a lot of interaction there between the prompt and the process, making sure we're going through the gears and getting to the endpoint. But for me, still, the number one most important P is that proficiency. It's the human angle. It's your skills, your experience, your expertise. This is what allows you and your jobs to get a better result from these tools than a graduate just entering the business world. So proficiency to check and judge the responses, to go back and demand higher, to go back to your requirements of excellence to get a better result. Ultimately, to edit and own the output. I don't think I've ever kind of blindly used the results that come out of ChatGPT response and taken it forward. So rewriting it in your own style. Fact checking as you go through, we'll talk a bit about that in a second, but ultimately your responsibility, you're owning this process start to finish. So thinking about each of those four as you go through is really, really so important.
And then you convinced me to add this extra slide into today's very busy agenda because you were very excited about it.
But this is my favorite slide, and this is, if you like, a subset, but I've sat with so many people who are at 0 or at 1 on the ladder and either coach them in how to write those early prompts or sat and studied them as they kind of go through the gears. And it's clear there are a lot of dead ends here. There are a lot of frustrations. There's a lot of people, I think, who've used the tool once or twice and either think it's broken or don't believe the hype. And the way to overcome that for me, a simple mindset to have, is this idea of branching, which can operate in a couple of different ways. So one is to build on a previous response by to query again. So like the phases across the bottom of the page here, let's ask for 20 audience needs. Let's ask for 100 audience needs. Let's pick 2 or 3. Okay, now let's build segments off them. Okay, now let's pick a segment. Let's develop ideas for them. So that idea of going through different phases and waves of that context to ultimately get you to a great response, applying your proficiency at every step of the way. That's one really smart way of doing it. And the other is just to develop lots and lots of ideas, cherry pick them and move through it. But this idea that I can just write one great prompt, there's a magic prompt out there that's going to write my perfect business plan, that's going to perfectly humanize my consumer target for this particular project. It just doesn't work like that. You might get lucky, but this idea of branching, going through various good branches after good branches, will ultimately get you to a great place. So anybody at 1 or 2 on the ladder wanting to move up to 3, 4 and above, I think this is really, really useful, and I've seen it day to day. This really helps.
Nice. Right, we tried not to make this into a training session and tried not to recap everything we've covered in the past, but we had to share some of those lessons, so glad we made time for that. Now let's get on to some of the new stuff and then some conversations about how it's practically being used in businesses, and some of the challenges around that as well, I'd say. So it's believe it or not, everything we've talked about was totally true in the world pre today. In the November 22 world, all of that could have been achieved with that tech, but tech has come a long way, particularly in the last week, but to some extent over the last year. And so now we're going to work through the right hand side of this chart basically, and talk about it. Now let's first talk about all the things in the red circles here. These were all announced on Tuesday, I think, Monday, and they should be mostly rolled out to most people who pay for ChatGPT Plus. And that is the ability to not just read 3,000 or so words in a prompt or in your context, but to skip to about 100,000 words, you know, an insane improvement in your ability to put data in. We'll talk about that. Ability to therefore remember about 100,000 words of the conversation instead of just remembering, you know, about 2,000 as it was before. With GPT-4 in March and then to this day, much more creative and more analytical than the old model was, than the November model, which was already amazing. And data freshness up to today, April 23, instead of September 21, so much more fresh. Again, not that that was a big problem for us over the last year, but thank you anyway. And then I'm gonna talk about that as well. I'm going to talk about its ability to search documents and to search the web. I think that all kind of goes together as like a new, almost like a new base level of capability. And this is the slide I'm going to use to kind of try and set that in context a little bit, talk about how it works. So nowadays, with all the modern additions, nowadays, for most prompts, you can do this, and you probably should do quite a lot of this. So to get to your response, to get to the output that ChatGPT generates, of course you have a prompt as part of the ingredients, and now up to 100,000 words in your prompt. That's a lot of information, a lot of qual transcripts we're going to talk about later, or interview transcripts, or reviews, or magazine articles, or whatever it is. It's a lot can go into your prompt there. And then also it's going to take into account some of the chat history in that chat. Again, up to 100,000 words. You can't do much about that. It will automatically take that into account. But remember, it's using that to answer the question every single time. Then importantly, and actually automatically now in ChatGPT, if it thinks it's useful, it will search the web for you. And critically, it's searching the web and drawing on specific bits of information to add to the context, rather than taking into account what's on the web. So we'll say in a minute that that's not very good, actually. Don't rely on it too much. And the ability, similarly, to upload documents, whether you upload a report or something you found on the internet, or your own document, you can upload a document, and in the same way as it browses the internet, finds little bits of information and sucks them into the context. It does that in documents as well. So right now it doesn't read the document as such and hold it in memory in the same way it would as if you used it in a prompt. Right now it mostly searches the document, tries to find some small pieces of the document that are useful and relevant, and tries to draw on them. That's quite limiting, actually, and you can be fooled by thinking it searched the web and read the web, or it searched my document and read the document. It's not quite doing that. It's quite limited. And then, of course, it's the other thing that it's using is its training data set. So the data the model was trained on up till about April 23 these days. And most of those are pretty good. But again, we just want to highlight that that searching documents, uploading documents, and searching the web often gives quite poor results. So don't rely on it. Be careful there. The rest of it works pretty well, particularly up to about the first 30,000 words. It's got very good ability to recall facts. After that, it starts to get a little less good and more interested in big, broad themes. These are things that will change in the future, though. So that's some of the new changes that have happened, and trying to put them in a bit of context about how you'll practically use them to get responses day to day. But one thing that hasn't, well, I say hasn't changed, one thing that has changed but is still true from December is that the AIs are not perfect, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, this was the early criticism, right? It can't recall the birthday of this particular US president. And yeah, we cover it in our Ps, right? It's proficiency. Check it, fact check it as you go through. You're responsible for that output. And yeah, a trade-off for it being so incredible and so creative in some places is that sometimes these hallucinations take place. If you're working with objective data, of course, it's critically important that you're fact checking, and yeah, there are other sources, and that's your responsibility to do that. I'd say quite often we're working quite subjective data, whether it's profiling an audience type or exploring a brand positioning or something like that if we're working in the brand and marketing space. But yeah, even if it's going to produce fewer hallucinations in time, it's going to be still so important to keep fact checking, and the fewer there are, the harder they're going to be to spot. So yeah, we're pretty sure this slide will always be in the pack, but yeah, a cautious reminder here.
Yeah, and it's important to recognize that the web search and the document upload have not solved this problem. It still persists. And so there are no magic fixes for this. In fact, they're an unknown. And so assume this is always the case. Right. Let's take a detour for a minute and talk about how businesses are practically using this as part of their day-to-day, like adoption, rollout, deployment, that kind of thing. Tell us all about that.
Great. So yeah, we've worked with a lot of companies. We've talked at conferences with zero cost invite, open doors, and we've seen huge pull and drive to learn more about AI. We've had people come to us, many people on the call, fantastic. We've had, yeah, people connect with us through social media. I can't remember a time when there was greater appetite and kind of single-mindedness about the direction of travel with a particular technology. And there are a couple of dimensions on which it's, I think, interesting to reflect, and for those on the call to think about where you might sit. The first is in terms of the, if you like, sort of aggressiveness to adopting the technology. How boldly is it used? From conservative through to bold. It would be easy to simplify that as size of the company, but that's just not true. We've spoken to some very small companies who've got a very conservative approach and worried about it getting out, about mistakes being made, about legal issues. And we've worked with some very large companies who are incredibly bold, very front-footed, really keen to drive home competitive advantage. The other factor is just how kind of big and broad that change within the company is. And whilst the cultural change often starts with a few pioneers, the extent to which that can be laddered up to cultural shift. And we work with some fantastic people, many of them on the call, to really think what that means. Is that just a training course? Is that a pilot team that does some work and shares it amongst the organization? Is that a series of training courses? What might that mean? And if we just build up the animations as we go through, so many people either are here or start here at the bottom left. So it's relatively basic usage, and it's a few pioneers within the company. With time, and I think moving up the ladder, as we had before, that bigger, bolder usage absolutely comes. But the bigger win for us, and what we've loved most over the last year, is enforcing this, or helping bring this cultural change along with pioneers, many of whom are on this call. I think it's relatively easy that when this is a conservative shift, we've seen a lot of conversations with IT, conversations with legal, just to help get this off the ground. But we've also seen some brilliant case studies of people operating on that top right hand side, and I'd encourage all of you here to build relationships out. Think of yourself more than just a pioneer of change in your processes. How can you think about a cultural shift within the organization? So to do this, yeah, we've helped think about guides, help thinking about mindset, manifesto, what's the agenda for these tools, help people think about privacy, legislation, what's the proficiency that everybody must sign up to say, I will not copy and paste this out, but I will fact check it, I will own it. I'm sure we'll see more shifts to the top right over time, and we're absolutely here to help be part of it and help drive it. But I think wherever you are on the map, and whether you're just making your kind of early footsteps into the bottom left, there's a really exciting future ahead. And just the development of the tools from a year ago to where we are now is clear again. We're probably working with the worst tools we're ever going to have. The future more than likely involves continued improvement on each of those dimensions, and I'm sure many more features and functions with time. But yeah, an interesting reflection, having met such a wide group of people on this, as to just where that shift is taking place.
So big changes, and then particularly as it relates to the market research side of things, where we've done a lot of work to really calibrate it against real world processes. We reckon it's pretty good, right?
Yeah, and this is, yeah, so we tried to be as scientific as possible here. This is looking back on a few projects we've run in the past, and again, we've mentioned we have a lot of fascination around segmentation, and we found we were pretty good, without being biased, without being too leading, about asking ChatGPT the types of questions we would ask to explore needs, to surface those category understanding, and then hypothesize to particular segments. We often found we were getting to 7, 8, sometimes 9 of a 10 segment solution. And on average, we were feeling like we were getting about 80% of the way there. And we were doing it faster. We were doing it a lot cheaper. Examples of segmentations that before we'd even run an interview, we were sharing hypotheses, going up to C-suite level to get feedback, to really fast iterate the outcome of a project. But we still come back to that P. We need to know what we're missing. This isn't good enough on its own. And if you're going to own the response, you're going to own the output, you need to get 100% of the way there. So that's really important. So that was our CMI perspective. I think it's a really interesting marketing perspective. I love following Mark Ritson. Encourage any of you to look up this report if you haven't seen it. But this idea of using that GPT training set to create synthetic data, to use this vast training set to this particular study, he was looking at brand positioning in the automotive category. And his argument at the end, okay, he's a marketer, he's got a strong passion for research and insight activities, is to say, would you rather have a kind of 90th percentile result within possibly hours versus waiting weeks and maybe spending tens of thousands of pounds on getting to like the right answer? It's an interesting dilemma. So for any researchers, insight professionals on the call, I think it's important to think about those two tracks. Are you fast tracking with imperfect data, or in parallel are you able to stick and train your clients to do it properly, to wait for the correct answer in the pre-AI world? It's really fascinating.
Big changes coming. And Louisa, you're going to tell us about some other market research examples in the real world.
I am. Hello, I'm Louisa, for those of you who don't know me. So I work with David and Richard. So with what Richard just said, that's quite hypothetical. So this is a real world example of how I use this with a client, trying to apply this, what we calling prompt segments, and whether they can work or not. So we took a robust piece of research that we had done with a client, very traditionally, a very traditional methodology. We found, 10 segments. We, were really confident in them and they were really useful for the client. I then did a kind of very long-winded iterative process of trying to recreate those segments using this synthetic data to see how close we could get to actual primary research that we had done in a very high quality manner. So for those of you who have read the book, you'll know some of the prompts to look at segments and audiences start with understanding needs and then go through trying to categorize the market. So we did that piece of work to really just do a direct comparison to the primary market, and this was in one particular country. And what we found was about 6 out of the 10 segments were absolutely spot on, and these were the very strategic segments that kept coming up time and time again. 4 out of the 10 were interchangeable and represented more tactical opportunities that actually, when we sat down and considered it strategically, had we missed them, it probably wouldn't have been a huge miss for the business. But the real core strategic segments were found every time. So we could kind of say that's 60% of the way there, because we never missed out anything really important. But crucially, and why I think this is a really good use case, is this piece of work that we had done was in one particular country. Let's say that was the US. They wanted to roll the research out to Europe, the big 4 in Europe, UK, France, etc. But didn't have the budget to do it. So by doing this piece of work, we could then use the same prompts and the same type of iterations, do it in different countries, and then end up with a global segmentation that we found, we felt was about 80% reliable based on the original piece of research. So we knew we hadn't missed anything out. I think without the original research, obviously, we'd want to dig more into the AI responses.
Crazy world, and none of us really imagined that was going to happen. And Louisa's going to stay on a minute and tell us about one of the new features. If we go back to our agenda, one of the new features that came out of nowhere a couple of weeks ago was ChatGPT's ability to kind of draw or make images, right?
Yeah, so thanks, David. So obviously, you're probably aware about generative AI for visuals with Midjourney, and there are other tools on the market that you can use. But having that tool using DALL-E embedded into ChatGPT, I think, was a real kind of revolutionary moment for being able to create images. So, to start with, just the basic being able to create icons for a presentation or for a report. You'll notice that we love an emoji at Audience Strategies, and Richard loves an emoji. But this is taking it to the next level, so expect lots of pictures in future reports when we're working with you. But the promise often isn't always coming out in the reality. So while it's amazing, you know, there are lots of limitations to it around whether your text is too complex, whether you're trying to create charts. One of my pet projects at the moment is trying to create infographics. So where I can combine, obviously from a research perspective, numbers and visuals. That's not going so great yet, but hopefully we'll get there. It also doesn't necessarily accurately respond to specific feedback. But again, wanting to really bring this back to a specific use case or case study that you could really use in your day-to-day world from, you know, tomorrow morning or Monday morning, I should say, is one thing I've been doing is trying to visualize audience segments. So previously, if you do a segmentation or you're looking at different audience categories, you're going to need some sort of creative person to develop images for you. You might need budget, you might need photography. I remember a segmentation, in fact, the three of us did at EMI Music, where I had to bring in items and we had to have the photography team take pictures just to create posters for the business. Now I would never have to do that. So we use prompts like describe the segment, we highlight the key points, but you have to, again, the same you know, lesson as we have for the generative text, iterate, iterate, iterate. It really doesn't always get it right. You have to keep changing it. And it also is quite biased. You'll probably have noticed this already with the tech stuff. You know, if you're very literal, like, give me a segment from a particular country, it will give you the absolute stereotype of that country, which is often quite offensive. So you need to be quite careful with that and really think about asking it to change the gender, make sure there's no age bias, and also define the different type of artwork. So I was trying to create a segment on the bottom row here. You'll see some of the different pictures that I came out and, you know, looking for more realistic photography, looking for something that's a bit more colorful, looking for something that has more clarity, i.e. one item, looking for someone in the middle there who's surrounded by all the things that might be important to them. But I'm really finding this such a brilliant way of bringing segments to life. And I think it's only going to get better.
There are a lot of sombreros in the
Yeah.
in the Mexican image that we generate to start with, and didn't feel like that might be like real life in Mexico. All right, great, thank you. Then I'll talk for a minute about the opposite of drawing, which is seeing. And this is something that ChatGPT was able to do as of about 2 or 3 weeks ago. I think this launched. So now you can upload photos or any kind of image, right? So handwritten notes you can upload, or hand-drawn notes, or like typed or digital things like pack shots or posters, or, you know, there really is no limit to what you can upload. It does a pretty good job of interpreting them. So as I said before, we're not going to give you demos now, but I'll show you the kind of thing that we've like tested it on, and it works really well. I like to take notes. I've got a terrible memory. I'm always writing. This is a typical page from my notebook. Sorry about the scribbles. And if you care to take this and put it into ChatGPT, even without any kind of a prompt, it will recognize most of what's on the page pretty well. It will recognize most of the relationships and the arrows and the bullet points and the sub-bullet points. It will recognize all that, and it will join together the themes of what it is that I'm trying to say, and it will elaborate and write a much more thoughtful summary of what happened in that meeting than if I just get my notebook and try to type it myself. It's very, very good. So handwriting and taking photos is a great use case for the visualization. Think about whiteboards, all sorts of things, but also like machine generated content. And this is one of my favorite graphs. My whole team are very familiar with this. We've been drawing this graph for years, or versions of it. We like to look at audience segments in 3 dimensions, left to right, what percent of that segment is an opportunity, up and down. All right, is that a lot of people or not? And color. All right, does that segment stand out relative to other segments, other brands or not? So 3 dimensions I'm obsessed by in this interpretation. And you know what? It's fun to teach people how to interpret it, but it does require a bit of explanation. And in the new world, if you clearly label the chart, even 3 dimensions, and you see on the right, I've clearly labeled it as best I can. If you take this image, put that into ChatGPT, again, without any prompts, just put it in, it will do a pretty good job of interpreting the image and correctly inferring which segments you should prioritize, which segments you shouldn't, and the kind of trade-off decisions that this is designed to make. So Is it perfect? No, those hallucinations are still there sometimes, but it does a pretty good job of reading data when it's labeled well. And that said, this is a more natural version of it. This is a real life version that we've drawn and used in the past. It can't read this. It's too complicated. Too many hallucinations. So there is a limit.
In the future, maybe?
Yeah, well, yeah, the question is when, right? Next week, next month, we don't know. But these are some silly use cases we've tried and tested, and we wrote for you a list of other use cases that you might have for this visualization capability. So whether it's interpreting data visualizations or interpreting business diagrams or process diagrams, or we talked about handwritten notes. If you've got an audience segment slide in a PowerPoint, you can now take that photo, put it in, and it can bring that to life, work out what all the numbers on the page mean and how they all relate together. Screenshots of dashboards or CRM systems. It can give you feedback on your layout or your labeling or what's not clear. There's no limit to it, but these are some of the ideas for how this new vision capability can be practically useful in your day-to-day work. And then, trying to get through all of the things on the capability slide, let's talk just for a minute quickly about this ability to speak and this ability to listen. And we're not going to do a demo, so I'm just going to talk about this for a moment, but it feels on the face of it like it's not that exciting to be able to speak and listen as an AI. Most of our communication with technology is by typing, and it's more efficient to type and read than it is to speak. So I find myself not using this very much, but it's totally game-changing when you do. A use case for me would be on a long car ride. Spend a lot of time in the States and therefore in a car, and you put this on, click the button, and just talk to it. Just say, hey, I'm wondering about X. What do you think? Oh, great. All right. And it'll give you some feedback, and you find yourself getting into this thoughtful, fascinating, and insightful conversation with it. And it's like a totally different use case than just typing and reading. So I would 100% urge everybody to try this. Not when you're at your desk, like when you're out for a walk maybe, or in the car, or somewhere where you're being a bit more thoughtful. But do me a favor, click on the icon, speak to it, have a real conversation about something you care about, and I think you'll be really surprised, and I think you'll find this as a really useful feature in your life going forward, albeit I use it not that much, but it is really cool when I do.
And it's that structure, isn't it? It takes you out of the idea of typing where you think before you type. It's just this flow, and the idea that you can bounce from different topics. Yeah, Sidra is on here as well saying, yeah, helps me ask better questions. I'm not hindered by typing. So it's just that free flowing. It's yeah, it's really cool. Lots more to come.
Can I interject with a little issue I had that might help people if they start to use this, which is that it seemed to think I was Welsh and would always respond to me in Welsh. So I managed to go around that by at the beginning of the chat always saying this is going to be a discussion in English, and then for the rest of the chat I would do in English. But every time I open a new chat it thinks I'm Welsh. So just tell it you're English at the beginning, and if it does put you into a different language.
Why Welsh? I wonder.
It must be the sound of my voice. I don't know.
Lucky you. But yeah, not one of the biggest things they've done. Not going to change how we spend most of our time, unlike the rest of it. But really important. Trust me, really, really important. All right, let's talk about something that also is very exciting and not how most of us spend most of our time. ChatGPT's ability now to run Python, a data science and coding platform, and where you can upload your data and you can talk to ChatGPT with voice if you like, or with text, using natural human language. And suddenly you can do real data science work. And I have wanted to learn Python for many, many years. I have never bothered because I've always been too busy. And now I really feel like Trinity in The Matrix when she suddenly decided that she wanted to be able to fly a helicopter, instantly downloaded the ability, and there she is, doing a pretty good job of flying a helicopter. And when this feature dropped into ChatGPT, suddenly, with my mind, albeit typing via my fingers, I had the ability to control data science workflows using just simple words and really simple words. So you can put a data set in as simple or as complicated as you want. And you can say things like cluster countries for me, not sophisticated prompts. Or you can say things like do some data cleaning, or do some data exploration, or find some useful patterns. Or you can say things like draw some graphs, the simplest possible prompts in the world that all of us are capable of, can generate really, really, really thoughtful, genuine data science work. But there are some caveats to go with my positivity here. And Simon spends more time in the world of analytics and data science than any of us on the team. So Simon, tell us about what I've been overly optimistic about this.
Yeah. Right. Thank you. Hi, I'm Simon. For those of you that don't know me, I also work with Richard and David and Louisa at Audience Strategies. So yeah, I've used Code Interpreter. I'm kind of straddling a little bit on that kind of data science area. So I do Python. I've been doing it for a little while, but I wouldn't say I'm an expert in that space. So this has been beneficial as well. I think the one thing I would say, kind of overarching this from what we talked about before, is that the same principles apply. If you ask ChatGPT to do something, don't just take it as fact when it gives it back. I think this is even a space where it's potentially easier to assume that, because you can think, okay, ChatGPT can write Python and I'm giving it the numbers. So 2 + 2 is 4. If I have 12 months of data and I say, give me the last 3 months, it's going to give me the last 3 months. I kind of think about it as almost as a junior analyst or someone in your team. You can tell them the problem, tell them what you want them to do. What they come back to you with might not be exactly what you intended. And again, that comes back to refining your prompts, learning how to engage with it, but also keeping in the back of your mind, like, does this data make sense? Do I need to ask it for a few, additional things so I can actually challenge it, check that it does make sense? But like David said, I think, you give it the right data set, it can give you some really insightful stuff on it. It can speed up some of the processes. Like, here I've got a new data set. Can you check this data set and validate it for me? And it can rapidly run through all the kind of checks like, okay, does every variable in here have data? Are there lots of zeros? Is the data heavily skewed? So on and so forth, and generate the visuals to go with that to let you get that kind of immediate visual exploration of the data. So I think it is super powerful. I would say there's also times with it where it's kind of like when you have someone come in to do a demonstration of like a new BI software, or come in to do Tableau. Like, if you have a perfect data set, which is very clearly labeled, and the data is fully cleaned and not skewed, and there's no problems with it, it can generate some beautiful stuff for you. But I think it's, to some extent, there's an element of, if there are problems in the data, it may struggle. And it's just keeping that in mind as well. But certainly, I mean, it's an amazing development in that, and it's providing way more access to this more quickly to more people.
And relatedly, but somewhat separately, you've used ChatGPT to just help you to write code in the first place, right? Just writing code you're going to deploy elsewhere. Just tell us a couple of lessons about you learned doing that.
Yeah, so I think that's a slightly different use case, in the sense of kind of, this gives you that initial exploration, or it can give you an overview of certain areas. I think if you're working on a large scale data science analytics project, you want that ability to have your code existing outside of that interface where you can't really see the code and you're not writing it yourself, so that you can, if you need to iterate, you can run it multiple times and it's running it in exactly the same way, and you have control. Okay, I want to tweak this parameter or make this adjustment, and you maintain that consistency. And also, it tends to be a much longer set of code, so you want that kind of longer, that ability to tackle a longer piece of code. But I think the way that I've found it really beneficial is almost as an assistant. And okay, I give it a few lines and take it kind of chunk by chunk to say, okay, I need to develop a bit of code to achieve this, or to analyze this variable. Can you write that for me? And then it will write it. Same principles, just in terms of kind of checking it. Is it giving you what you expect? Is it giving you the right answer? But yeah, I mean, it streamlines, for me at least, that speed of developing code. The other thing which is really useful is when, I think most people that do coding will relate to kind of going on forums. They've got a particular challenge, they're not really sure how to solve it, sifting through forums, going through 20 pages of people that have a similar problem to yours, but not quite the same one, and then sifting through the solutions to find one that actually works. But then, does it work for that person? Does it work for your problem as well? This is like just having a real-time assistant that's given you a tailored answer to your specific problem, If it doesn't work in any way, you can instantly go back and get another response to that. So I think it's, yeah, that back and forth has been really beneficial. And then I think almost as a learning, so, you know, you've got your spectrum of, are you learning Python? Are you kind of intermediate? Are you advanced? I think if you're learning Python as well and you're discovering new things, it's really, really useful when ChatGPT gives you that code to say, there's a function in here I've not seen before. Can you explain to me how that's working? What does this parameter do? And it can actually help to teach you and help you to learn from the code that it's giving you as well.
Nice. It's insane, like how many use cases there are. We're running up to the hour now. We've still got a couple of big things to show you.
I can just drop one quick thing in, sorry, which I did. The ability to see has also been really, really useful here. And it's one which I didn't initially anticipate being so useful, but the ability to take a screenshot of what's on your screen and say, okay, here's a chart. Tell me how to recreate this in Python. And it can write you the code right down to the formatting, the labeling, the color palette that, you know, it's using. Or even if it gives you something back and it's like, oh, well, it's put this in the wrong place and this is wrong and that doesn't look how I wanted it. Rather than trying to type and describe which bits are wrong, you can just screenshot it in and say the axis doesn't look right, or I wanted it on this scale and so on. And it speeds that up dramatically as well.
What an insane world. And again, like none of us knew this was going to be possible in December or that even a month ago. Right, so the last thing, and then some lessons before we then finish the formal bit and kind of open it up to the floor for discussion and questions and debate. The last things I want to show you, yeah, this arrived for me last night. So I was up all night playing with these, so fun. It's the ability to build your own version of ChatGPT, basically. They're called My GPTs. And you'll find it on the top left if you have it turned on. It should be turned on for everybody who's a Plus subscriber now. You see I've built a few already, and soon there'll be a marketplace. You can find other people's and share other people's. Actually, Richard, if you want to put a link to the slides in the chat, then it has links to other GPTs we've built in case you want to play with those or build your own. So how this works is you can name your GPT, call it anything you want, give it a short description so people can find it, and then critically give it some instructions for how you want it to behave. And you can upload some files that it can draw on in its answers, and you can give it some superpowers if you want. You can give it web browsing or image generation or code interpreter or not. It's your choice. And the first, I built 3 this morning to just think through and practice and see what was useful about this. So the first is our book, our first book. We just put the book in. It took a while to get that working properly. Put the book in and gave it strict instructions saying, please answer using content from the book wherever possible. And it's pretty good. Like it's right. It can mostly find the relevant bits of the book and mostly draw on them and give you a personalized answer based on what's in the book, you know, combined with its vast knowledge. So is it the perfect way to chat with the book and interrogate the book? No, it's not, but it's pretty good, actually. The link's there. Anybody should be able to access that and make use of it. Do you want to put the individual links into the GPTs as well, maybe? Give me something to do while I'm waffling. You know, but it's not perfect. This theme is again and again, it's not perfect. I saw this quote this morning on Twitter. Working with ChatGPT with multiple PDFs is all you need to realize that you're not dealing with a super intelligence, more like an undergrad who forgot they were meeting with you and is frantically trying to answer your question in the background. It can feel like that. It probably won't for long, but it does a pretty good job, you know. The second one I built, again, just exploring use cases for it, was to dump in essentially our corporate knowledge base, our like policies, our points of view, our position papers, our like ways of working, overviews of the things we do every day, which collectively is a corpus of advice on how to build an audience strategy capability in your team that is really impactful. How do we think about audience segments? How do we think about qual versus quant? How do we think about data science versus research? How do we do a good audience segmentation? How do we drive cultural change? We've written all this down, put it into the GPT, and it does a pretty good job of answering questions about how you should build an audience strategy capability or how audiences can be at the heart of your strategy to help you to drive growth. It's our perspective shared via the GPT. And is it perfect? No, but it does a pretty good job and not bad for 5 minutes work. And the last one I built, thinking about qualitative research, I've just been, or actually I'm still in the middle of interviewing a bunch of DJs and labels and festival promoters and club promoters about their advice for upcoming artists, for how artists can have a more sustainable career. So I've got all these essentially transcripts of interviews I've done. I put all of those into this GPT, this career GPT, electronic music career GPT, I've named it now. And you can ask it like, hey, what advice do you have for upcoming DJs? What advice do you have for producers? How can I monetize my music in a better way? And it will draw on all these interviews I've done in a pretty effective way to give you advice. So it's like diving into the qual interviews, reading them all and drawing your own conclusions, but with an AI doing it for you. I can't share the link to that one. That's a private client work. Although I'm sure it'll get published at some point. But these, again, are just thinking through the kinds of use cases that are possible. And that was really just last night. So, deep breath. That brings us to the end of a reflection on where we were a year ago, where we are now, and therefore, you know, where we're going with all these things. We'll come back to that slide for Q&A in a minute, but we wanted to end with one closing thought. Go on, I think you should wrap us up.
I think many of you have heard this before, but the analogy just works so well. So ChatGPT, generative AI, is clearly a great multiplier for us. And this idea we keep coming back to, this electric bike for your mind. So electric bike helping us go further, helping us go to places we want to get to quicker, helping us climb that mountain we might never have climbed before. But there's a human involved there. You still need to set the direction. You still need to pedal. You still need to navigate, and you still need to be able to know where to park. So it's not the self-driving car. This isn't get in, switch off, and get to your high quality, quick, low cost answer. This is about you being in control, you using your 4 Ps, you engaging your stakeholders, you owning the output. But it's clear there's a massive multiplier here. We've seen the rate of innovation and the growth of these tools in just 1 year. And I think it's a very, very exciting future to think of ahead of us. And the fact that so many of these lessons, this mindset that we're helping develop here, so many of those lessons still hold true today. We're confident they'll hold true in the future. And we think the earlier you can climb that ladder, the better, the stronger you're going to be as these tools get better and better in the future. So I think time for us to close out there, but for anybody who's still on and wants to ask questions, throw us ideas and suggestions in the chat. That's absolutely awesome. And yeah, thanks everybody for dialing in today, whether it's a Friday afternoon in the UK or through the middle of the day in the US or wherever you are in the world. It's been great to have you